You're listening to Off to Market with Scott Farley and Hamish Chadwick.
I'm Hamish.
And I'm Scott.
And this week we're touching on commercialisation. Scott, do you want to lead us in?
Yep. We did briefly talk about this in the planning stages of the project. You have to figure out which way you want to actually guide the project in the future to accurately plan out the process that you might design by. But commercialisation is obviously a very important part of it. You can do all the technical things. You can make your product and everything, and you get the marketing message right, logos, everything right. But in the end, you still have to make money out of this product some way. Otherwise, as we discussed earlier, it's much more realistic to go and get a flight somewhere and have a nice holiday. So obviously, we're trying to make money out of this thing, and a lot of these products, can be quite lucrative, but they all have their own risk factors, and some of the processes you're using to develop a product or commercialise a product can be reliant entirely on a third party. So I think we talked about the three different ways of going about it. You can develop the product yourself, manufacture it, and sell it yourself online or through retail, or on the street if you'd like to, and trade shows, whatever. Distribution model where you may manufacture the product, but you use another sales platform that another person already has in place. So say someone's already supplying to BW and you just supply to them, and they use their existing logistics and network to just plug your product into their system of their sales pipeline. That's a distribution model. Then you've got licensing. So licensing is when you might develop the idea, you don't do the manufacturing, and you license the technology to somebody else who's got the manufacturing ability and the distribution network to sell it. So in the distribution network and the licensing network, you're reliant on finding the person who can actually sell your product through their pipeline. And that comes with its own complexities. Obviously, selling it yourself, you've got a lot of control over it, but there's a lot of cost involved. Some projects are just too expensive in their setup costs to allow that process. We're doing a packaging product, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars to get the product off the ground. It's not a lot different to changing an engine in a car. There's a lot of infrastructure in place that has to be changed, so you have to rely on a third party with hundreds of millions of dollars in their kitty, in their budget, to be able to take that product to market. So we are entirely reliant on a third party to make that product work through a licensing process. We'll take the technology along to them and the patent, and it's solved, and we solve the product, the technology issues, and we hand that manufacturing process and distribution and sales and implementation and branding and marketing, IP, everything across to them, and we get paid a small royalty for doing that. In that situation, sometimes getting through the door, really when you come down to it, you've got your product, you've got your marketing, you've got your logo. What do? You have to somehow get through the door of that person who you want to target, and it's good to target that person early in the piece. Who's this product? What's our most logical person to go and license this product with? And generally, you do that fairly early, and then you can actually even almost customize the product that you're presenting towards that company. You might have the same colours as them. You might look at their culture or product range and try and tie into their look and feel of the product, perception on the market, price points, all the rest of it. And then obviously when you put that in front of them, they're much more likely to take it up because they see it in their range. But it can be the little things that stop you in this situation. We used to employ a guy who was he was actually a professional commercialisation guy. So he'd take your product and go around to people and present to them. He was very good at it. But one of the biggest hassles you have, he's retired since so we don't use him anymore. So quite often I'm tasked with the job, and with our own projects I'm certainly tasked with it. But a lot of times the difficulty is getting through the door. You ring up the receptionist for a big multinational, and you say, I'm Scott, and I've got this great idea, I need to speak to someone in the marketing or CEO role, and they just will not get you to that person. Zero interest. It's just another hassle, another person. They got to, if you're not a known customer, you just don't get the look in. So you have to be very cunning about the way you do that. You might do things like send a present along that is a giveaway, that has a little presentation with it that allows them to come back to you in some way. You might do a campaign that puts information out there that they see, and you become maybe a thing that they want. You make yourself appealing to them, so they come back to you. There's obviously issues there with becoming public before you want to. A lot of this stuff's done under non-disclosure agreement with the provisional in place, so you've got some cover. And you don't really want competitors to know too much about the product, because even if you're talking to a licensor of your product, you may still have years of development before the product hits the market. So you go and make it public, you're instantly giving that person's competitors a competitive edge to go and do their own thing, try and get around it. So that's where non-disclosure agreements and early stage patenting is useful. Same with distribution. You've got to find the right distributor. The same issue. You ring distributors and you won't get past the receptionist. So you've got to try and find ways of getting past these people. Probably have you got any input? Because this has been a big blur from me.
That's right.
I need you to get involved, Hamish.
Oh well,
no,
okay.
Well,
just fascinating listening to your. Yeah, you've obviously got some experience with going to pitch. Is what you're really talking about there.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Can you give us any anecdotes? Are there any? Can you give me any examples of the experiences you've had in front of an investor?
Yeah. So, one of the most. Well, I guess I have been fairly lucky. There's only been a few. I mean, there's definitely a project we're working on at the moment, and there's only 2 players who we can present to, and neither of them I can get in front of. So that from day one, I said, I've got an idea for you about how we can solve this problem. It's better than anything else in the market. It's very, very suitable to the consumer and the retailer. But there are only 2 retailers we can approach for this project. So I can solve it for you, but the risk is very high in this project, because if we can't get in front of the right people in these 2 places, or they have a different theory about what they're doing with this solution or this problem they have, we're going to go nowhere with it, because there's no other way you could do this yourself. It's too expensive. Well, there was one way, but it's very expensive, so big investment process. But I am still, and it's been nearly 4 months, trying to get a lead and an avenue, and so what I'm doing now, instead of going directly to them, I'm talking to people who deal with them. So stepping stones, I guess you could call it. So people who they deal with in this area, other suppliers who already supply certain things to them, they are going to be my avenue towards that introduction. So I guess the same as when you're innovative with your products, you have to be innovative about how you get in front of people, how you can be referred. It's a really good way of getting in front of people, is to be referred by a known source. Instantly, all the stop gates that come up normally from a cold call go away. If I know somebody's good at something and I refer that person to another person, that person is very, very likely to take that supplier on, because they're pre-qualified. And if you can somehow pre-qualify yourself, and it might be through a social media campaign, or becoming an expert in the field, possibly a person of influence, I've heard it called. If you can become that person of influence, and the person you're trying to meet with can see that advertisement or that media outlet, they might come to you rather than you going to them. So that's a really nice way of doing it as well, but very hard to do.
Well, no, but that comes back to the concept of tangibility. So the role of a brand at this point, obviously, with what we're talking about in off to market, is being prepared. A lot of it is just being prepared. It's being prepared for the next step. And I think in terms of commercialisation, I don't, in my role, get in front of, I'm not there with the client to pitch to people, giving them investment funding to build things, but I'm certainly there at the point where they need to, when we've touched on this before, for instance, getting a suitable name to go to those people. You can't just go to one of these meetings and say, well, we don't have a name yet, we're just calling it prototype 5. That's useless at that point. You've got to show them that you've put skin in the game in terms of being prepared. And I think one point I'd like to get across too, and this is, I suppose, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is part of the commercialisation process, but let's just say you've got your product in your hand, you've got 2,000, 5,000, 10 million of them sitting on your doorstep, you've now got to sell. Obviously the next step is to get those units, get that product to customers and get them to pay for that product so you can start making some profit. What I've seen recently and what I've helped a client with recently in this regard is pricing. Probably not what most people would think I would get involved in. However, in terms of their message, this person was losing out because the pricing structure that she had, she'd put one price on one product, and then if someone wanted to buy in bulk, what wasn't taken into consideration was a pricing platform where there was different levels of pricing based on volume. Because I had to explain that, look, if someone wants to buy, let's just say 200 of this particular product, they would expect to get some sort of wholesale rate. You can't look at that and go, well, I know what it costs me to build one of these units, because what you've got to take into consideration there is marketing cost at that point, because marketing always costs money. It's not free. Usually there's some sort of cost involved. But if you have someone that wants to buy 200 units of your product, well, then what you have to look at is, well, what have I paid for in terms of marketing? If someone wants to buy one, you can work out, let's just say with a social media campaign, you can look at cost per click. So you know exactly how many clicks it's taking for someone to buy one product. However, if a retailer comes to you and says, look, I just want to buy 200 of them right now, the bonus for you as the owner of that product is to say, well, I haven't actually spent a cent on outbound marketing. However, I can give that person a better price. I should give that person a better price because the marketing is in them agreeing to buy your product. They like it, but they're going to buy more than one. So giving them a wholesale price, there's nothing wrong with that. You're not actually losing out because that then becomes a marketing cost. So giving them a wholesale rate is a marketing cost.
That way, yeah.
And as soon as I did this for the client, we turned around, got a price list. So obviously if you want to buy one, it costs X. If you want to buy 10, it costs a little bit less. And you want to buy 200, well then the way we sold it to the retailers was to say, you will make more margin. So we weren't saying your cost, we were simply advertising it. Instead of saying cost per unit, we'd say margin that you'll make, because obviously with most countries there's laws as to what you advertise as an RRP, a recommended retail price. So what we were saying is, okay, it costs X on the shelf, that's what we have to market it at. Your recommended retail price will be X. However, because of the buy price that we're giving you, your margin increases exponentially. So it goes from with the normal recommended retail price for one unit, it was, say, I don't know, they'd be making 2% margin. However, if they're buying 200, we could sell to them that they were making 35% on that margin. So the more units they bought, the better the deal it was for them in terms of on selling. So there's that side of it as well. That's all part of the commercialisation process, is being prepared to have that conversation, not to simply turn around and say, I don't know. You have to have an answer for that.
Yep.
Otherwise, they're just going to turn around, like most retailers will do, because it's a fairly cutthroat world, retail. Because all it is reselling other people's product, is they'll just give you a price. They'll say, well, this is what we want to buy it at. And if you simply agree to that, well, then you've got no idea. You might have just created a very unprofitable situation for yourself, where you're giving product away, and you don't want that. But you have to have some sort of idea to go back to them and to start a conversation. That's what you've really got to do. So that's my experience with commercialisation, is at that end, which is right at the bitter end, I suppose, where you need to start selling.
You did have some other points about selling. So what I might do is I'll just finish off on the licensing distribution, like what you need in those sort of situations, what you have to take into those meetings.
Yep.
And then maybe we come back to you and we talk about the actual selling itself, the bare bones marketing principles that you were talking about earlier, before we started the podcast.
Okay.
So what I'll do is I'll just go through quickly the bare minimum for a licensing, if you go and sit in front of a licensing company or a distribution company, what are the things you need to go in with? And I guess this is a little takeaway for people in this situation. You really need some cover from an intellectual property perspective. So I still do things with an NDA regardless of my cover, because
and just to clarify, an NDA is
a non-disclosure agreement or a non-disclosure agreement, and in that non-disclosure agreement I always have as well a non-compete clause. So a non-disclosure agreement means you've got some sort of tie to the meeting. So I've met with you and we've talked about this. It's written, it's signed off, so that if you go away and someone does something around you or in line with what you're doing by themselves and then puts that on the market, you've got some sort of comeback to them legally. A non-compete clause I put in there because sometimes, even though I tried my hardest to make the most relevant product that suits the market, I've actually had big multinationals go away, not do my product, go around my product, do it a different way. Funnily enough, it doesn't always work out because usually when they're so busy trying to overcome your patent that they forget what the market wants. So usually my products are based on market need. So they go away, they do it a different way, and the market doesn't like it. So we had a situation with a multinational who came and did a similar product to ours in a different way, and it lasted a year on the market. Would have cost them probably $2 or $3 million to do the campaign when they could have just licensed our product, and it was a bit total waste of time. But that's well within their right. I couldn't be upset because obviously in that situation I didn't actually have a non-compete clause in there, and I didn't actually have an NDA in place because I had a patent in place. So generally in that situation, that was a distribution situation, and generally in those situations you're not normally needing to have an NDA in place because you've already made the product and all this. Licensing, you haven't got a product made, you're relying on them to make it, so then you really should have a non-disclosure agreement and a non-compete clause in that non-disclosure agreement. As far as what you need to go into the meeting with, you need a basic cost of what the product could cost in mass production. So you need to know what the cost of manufacture is so that you know what the price point is, because that's one of the unknowns when you go into that meeting. That's what they're going to need to know. You have a solution that's technically resolved, so it solves the functional and all the other benefit, all the other functional needs of a product. You have to have a brand. You obviously have to have a logo and a name for the product. It's important. It's not essential, but it adds to the whole package that you're presenting. It also gives you more leverage as far as your intellectual property. It has to be highly refined. You're talking to a multinational. They need to know when you go in front of them, if there's any issues with it technically, or it just looks clumsy, or it hasn't been made well. If it's a printed prototype, rarely would you get across the line. It has to be really well refined. It has to work and look like the final thing. Multinationals see a lot of products. They're very busy people. They're not willing to put any effort into your product. They're really critical of it. You walk in there, if they can find anything to pull it down with, they will. So you have to have it totally refined. It needs to be designed for mass production so that costings reflect the right price point. So there's a few things that have to be done. Don't think you can just turn up to a multinational with an idea and get a deal across. I've never seen it happen. It probably has happened in time. Probably in the old days it may have happened before people were more refined, but they've got so much access to so many good ideas these days and so many presentations that the pitch has to be pretty perfect, the product has to be pretty perfect, the prototype has to be perfect, and your costings and everything have to be worked out so you know exactly where you sit on the market and where that's going to be positioned. So that happens with licensing. Distribution is pretty much the same. If you go along with a prototype to a distributor and say, this is a product I want you to distribute, I will put the effort and time and money into manufacturing it with the tooling and everything. If you want to put it on your range, the same thing. You have to have a really well worked out prototype, and you have to have the costs because they're going to need to know if they can actually sell it. So they're the basics. Let's sneak now back to selling it yourself, because that's obviously the other commercialisation avenue. And Hamish is going to talk about the marketing required to get that off the ground, because it's one thing to have a product in your hand and solve all the problems that have a market need. The other thing is actually telling the market, here's my product, you need to buy it. Can you lead us into that?
I can. It'll be in the next podcast. So,
okay, so it's got too long.
We'll talk to you next week about that, because we've hit the 20-minute mark. So I think people want to take a break and get a coffee. We'll see you next week, Scott.
You've been listening to Off to Market with Scott Farley and Hamish Chadwick.